All right, let's talk about loops here real quick. Jeez. All right, let's talk about loops. So what a loop is it is me telling the code to run multiple times. Now, with the programs we built so far, our code will run zoop once, go through its motions, and then it'll be done. When you add in loops, however, you can actually run a section of code multiple times, over and over and over again. Examples of this would be, well, if I haven't typed exit or something to quit the game or something like that, well, just keep running the game. Maybe a character gets 3 hits in a game. Well, I'm going to hit, do all the animation and damage, and then it's going to loop once more, and I'm going to hit and do all the damage and stuff, and it'll loop one more time, and I get those 3 hits. That's the place where typically loops would be used. Now, there are 2 kinds, generally speaking. There's a for loop and then there's a while loop. A for loop goes typically a certain number of times. 10 times, 5 times, a million times. The while loop can go a certain number of times, but it can also go until a certain condition's met. So maybe it will go 3 times, or maybe it will go until someone types in this particular phrase or something like that. That's essentially how the whole loop situation works. So let's see a couple of examples here of some loops. And we'll just do them all in one file here. So your first loop typically would be your for loop. So simple, I'm just going to make a little variable equals 4 or something like that. For I in range 0, n. Now, I could alternatively just change this n to a 4 probably, and instead of making an extra variable for it, but and we'll just print something here. We'll run, and you'll see what this does. It starts at 0, goes to 1, 2, 3, and goes until we hit 4. 4 is where it stops. So you'll notice it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, and stops when it hits 4. Now if I hit, let's just put a 5 there. No, it'll go 5 times. So this is the value that determines basically the endpoint. This is the value that determines the beginning. And I is just the variable that's going to keep track of that. So I could print I, or I could just print booger or something like that, and it will print that, that many times, like so. Simple for loop goes a certain number of times. Now again, while loops can go a certain number of times. I do the same thing. Count equals, let's say 0. While count is less than 3, and just like with if statements, you have the same tab over spacing. Anything tabbed over is going to be inside that for loop. So if this was Java, we'd have a brace, and it wouldn't matter where it's located at. But Python doesn't have braces, so you have to account for where things are by tabbing it over. And that tends to be where people have the biggest problem, the tab overs. Let's see here. So I'm just going to, all right, now for a loop that's counting something to work, you need 3 parts. One is the start, which I is going to be 0. One is the end condition. And one is a counter. Now for loop has pretty much an implicit counter. A while loop doesn't have an implicit counter, so you have to give it one. So in this case, we'll just simply print fuzzy pickles, like that. And I could, put a little quotation here maybe and count. Now if I leave it like this, and run it, what you end up with is what's called an infinite loop. Ta-da! So I definitely don't want an infinite loop. I'm going to crash here, apparently. No. It's fine. Yeah, close program. We'll open it back up. There we go. All right, so an infinite loop can crash, or you can force close it. Mine's crashed because my computer's not very good here that I'm using right now, so there we go, intro loops. All right, so I definitely don't want this to be an infinite loop. An infinite loop doesn't meet its end condition, so it just keeps going on forever. And that's the most common error you'll have with your loops. So count equals count plus 1. So now I have a counter. So when I run this, 0, 1, 2. Notice it goes 0 at the start, then it ups to 1. Well, 1 is less than 3. It goes to 2. 2 is less than 3. And then it checks. 3 is not less than 3, so it'll stop. And that's generally how your loops are going to work. Now, we have a couple of other ways we could do this. It just depends. We could add in, and this is strictly just with Python, but this statement. It has indeed. Let's see what happens if I add that. And honestly, there you go. If you add an else to a while loop, then it will stay here and loop this particular part of the code until it finishes. And once it finishes, it will just print this. Now, alternatively, I could just probably do that, and I get the same result. So it doesn't matter, but that's just another way we could do this. Now, let's see a couple more examples here. Now, what's a good one to pick here? Okay, let's do this. And these are all very simple loops. Of course, just like with if statements, you can have nested loops too. A loop inside of a loop, which makes things a bit more complicated, but let's say I wanted to print a string. So s equals fuzzy pickles, say, right? For I in s. And then I can just, gotta put my little quotation, print I. So with this, yep, there we go. Notice what it does. For this, if I have a string, it can basically start at the beginning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the space counts as 1, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So basically, this is basically going to go 0 to 12, if I were printing out the numbers of I. And then it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way down to 12, and print I being each individual letter. So you can use this to print off text. You can use this to go through, characters and replace things if you need to. If I were checking a password, for example, and I was going to check it one character at a time, maybe, I could do that. Just depends on how you wanted to use it. But that is your quick little introduction into basically how some simple loops work. Inside here, I could also put in if statements and other things, and typically you will have those in a program. A loop is like one of the basic building blocks, along with, conditional statements and things like that, variables that will build any program that you ever do. All right, so that is Introduction to Loops.